Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Federal Society and the Jewish Law Students Association, I want to thank everyone for coming here. I hope you all had a little food. I think we ran out of subs, but we're very honored here today to have Professor Michael Krauss of George Mason Law, who will be giving a presentation followed by a follow-up by Professor Paul Dubinsky of Wayne State. So please be courteous to our speakers. We should have time for some Q&A after. I'm going to turn it over to Elliot real quick to formally introduce Professor Krauss.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everybody, for coming. First of all, I'd like to thank the Federal Society, specifically Brett Mellon, who was instrumental in putting this event together. I wanted to reiterate that Wayne Law, we encourage diversified debate in a tactful and respectful manner. All voices deserve to be heard and deserve to be given a forum to express their views, and they also deserve to be challenged in a respectful way. Another idea on that note, it's imperative always to hear two sides of a story. Many times in the news and the media, and from what we hear, only one side is presented very strongly, and people occasionally formulate an opinion based only on that one source of information. So even before one comes to a conclusion, it's always fair to one's intellectual honesty and integrity to be able to hear two sides before forming an opinion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Michael Krauss. Professor Krauss has gotten his BA from Carleton University, his LLB from Universität de Sherbrooke. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Not really, but that's good.
I did my best in my East Coast accent. And he got his LLM from Yale Law School. He's been at George Mason for quite a while, about 25 years or so.
24 years.
24 years. He teaches jurisprudence, products liability, professional responsibility, remedies, and torts. He has expertise in areas such as Israel, terrorism-based studies, and obviously products liability as well. He has actually just come out with a new publication, Principles of Products Liability, which is available on Amazon.com for those who are taking products liability in the future or just have any curiosity about it. Without further ado, and with a very large thank you, Professor Michael Krauss.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. Appreciate that. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, all of you, for turning out. I'm actually a fan of Detroit. My wife and I were here, what was it, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. We drove 500 miles. We spent a day at the auto show, then we drove 500 miles back. And it was a great auto show, and I'm a fan of the city, so I was very happy to get the invitation to come and be with you all. A long time ago, Mr. Indig has alluded to my advanced age, but a long time ago, when I graduated from Yale Law School, my master's thesis was under Eugene Rostow, and it was about the international law of war, and it became my first publication when the Yale Journal of International Law published it. And I went on back, I was born in New York City, but grew up in Canada, I went to university in Quebec, as Mr. Indig pointed out, and my first teaching gig when I became a law professor in Quebec was entirely in international law. And I was a justice for 5 or 6 years in the Jessup International Moot Court competition. Perhaps Professor Dubinsky sends a team from Wayne State there. I imagine he does. And but since I've been at George Mason, I've been doing other things, as has been pointed out, mostly torts and products liability related. But I've always kept my finger in this. It's always interested me greatly. And back in 2005, when which is the year of the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, I was fortunate enough to be a fellow, to be named an academic fellow by the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is a counterterrorism think tank based in Washington, D.C. It was an interesting mission to Israel. We ended up discussing, we needed 2 security clearances, an American and an Israeli, because of the discussions we had, including discussions, personal ones, with the Jordanian ambassador, the Turkish ambassador to Israel, as well as counterterrorism experts in Israel and on the U.S. side. So I've been involved with this for some time. I write about it occasionally, or more than occasionally, and I'm very happy to be here with you and to talk to you about the question of Israel's borders, because I think in many ways this question turns out to be a primer, as I point out above, a primer in international law. There's just enough important principles that come out that of which many people are unaware or only dimly aware, that it is really a useful exercise in addition to its intrinsic importance. Let's see if I know how to do this. Okay, so obviously we now have recent events that bring Israel to the forefront as every year. There are different events, of course, but in the relatively recent past, of course, we have the attempted flotilla coming from Turkey that was intercepted by the Israeli Navy, and that has led to a chilling of relationships between Turkey and Israel. We have the Jerusalem Prize that was granted last week to the Scottish author Ian McEwan, who defied lobbying on him, strenuous lobbying on him to boycott Israel, and declined to come and pick up the award. On the other hand, there have been more than a few rock concerts that have been canceled because the artists have determined that Israel's policy regarding the Palestinian territories was obnoxious to them. Just this week, as we know, the United States vetoed a Security Council resolution that declared that, quote unquote, Jewish construction in certain parts of Jerusalem was illegal. The resolution failed because of the opposition by the United States. So, on the one hand, there's a good part of international public opinion that believes that Israel is a scofflaw, is a perpetual violator of international law. But on the other hand, there's also the possibility that the condemnation of Israel is an indication of the decline of the rule of law internationally. And all of this is in the context of the possible unilateral setting of borders by Israel. And that possibility of the unilateral setting of borders became realistic, a realistic political proposition in Israel in 2006, shortly after the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, of which I spoke. So in 2006, Ehud Olmert was pretty candid about his party, the Kadima Party's plan for disengagement from the West Bank. His message was pretty simple, since he believed, and I think it is correct, that Israel had no one to talk to anymore on the Palestinian side. Israel was now determined, or at least his party was determined, to act unilaterally to define and secure Israel's borders. And we'll talk about this, I'll show you a map in a bit. But generally, this plan for realignment amounted to withdrawing forcibly, just as Israel had forcibly withdrawn Jewish people from Gaza. This plan involves forcibly withdrawing 60,000 Jewish people into blocks of land that are adjacent to the so-called Green Line. More about that in a bit, but the Green Line was the ceasefire line established in 1949 at the end of Israel's War of Independence, and then declaring a permanent border, which has not ever been declared. Olmert was careful not to describe the exact contours of what the border would be, but he made it clear that it would bring all of the Jewish population within Israel's yet to be completed security barrier, for which construction began